in the chat box if you'd like to let us know where you're from and if you've got other folks viewing the webinar with you. If you need to know where the chat box is, just look up in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. You'll see kind of like a cartoon bubble with the word chat underneath it. Just click on that. That'll take you to the chat box. We also have a Q&A box as well. That's the one with the question mark on it. Use either to pose your questions. Becky and Shelley Thompson and I will be looking at those boxes throughout the webinar, so we'll be tracking questions as you ask them. I'm very happy to be joined today by Shelley Thompson, who's going to be moderating our webinar. Shelley is the State Archivist from South Dakota. She is also a CoSA board member, and she also is chairperson of the Education and Training Committee. That's the committee who develops these webinars for our members. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to Shelley and welcome her and ask her to take it away. Hi, Shelley.
Hi. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, you sound great.
Good. Okay, good. So what we'd like to do is introduce our speakers and let everybody know how the webinar is going to go today. First up, we have Steve Excell, who is the current Washington State Archivist. He has previously served 12 years as Assistant Secretary of State, where he supervised the Washington State Archives, Washington State Library, and the Legacy Oral History Project. He served as the executive sponsor of the Washington State Digital Archives Project. He previously served as Chief of Staff to Washington State Governor John Spellman, and also served as Legislative Director to U.S. Representative Joel Pritchard during his first 3 terms in Congress. After Steve gets done presenting, we're going to hear from Sarah Koonts. Sarah has worked at the State Archives of North Carolina since beginning as a graduate student intern in 1992 and was appointed State Archivist in 2012. The State Archives is part of the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, the nation's largest and most comprehensive natural and cultural resources agency. So we'd like to start with Steve, and Steve's going to tell us all about sustaining a grant-funded program from the Washington State Archives perspective. And when he's done, he's going to pass it on to Sarah. Take it away, Steve.
Oh, thank you, Shelley. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. In the first 2 webinars, we received some very good advice about what grant makers are looking for, what makes one grant stand out heads above another, what makes for clear, concise grant writing, things you can do during the grant, possibly to get more grants from the same grant maker. Today, we're going to be dealing with that bittersweet subject. What do you do when the grant comes to an end and the money runs out? And stay calm, we have some ideas for you. I love this movie, Jerry Maguire, and the famous line is always, show me the money. I actually think it was Cuba Gooding Jr.'s role as Rod Tidwell, who said the line to Jerry and taunted Jerry to say it back. And I think the gut reaction to everyone when the grant money dries up is we can't do anything, oh, woe is me. And we'd like to kind of change that thinking. Instead of thinking about just the money, think about the outcome. What are you trying to get done? And what is some sustained way to get there over time, even if it's taking baby steps? I'll give you an example. Let's say you had a $10,000 grant to process and digitize a very large photo collection, but the grant only provided enough money to do 1/2 of the collection. You could look at that problem 2 different ways. You can say I have a $10,000 problem and I can't do anything until I get another $10,000. Or you can say my outcome is to digitize these photos and I might be able to come up with some strategies to make sustained progress over time. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. Also, when the grant wraps up, it should not be the very first time you thought about sustainability. Most grant makers actually have a section in the grant application that asks you to describe how you're going to sustain the activities after the grant is over with. I once had a major grant I was administering. It was a partnership between a museum and the Seattle School District for an alternative school #1. And one of the things they wanted us to do was sustain the program forward. And like 2 years later, I actually got a call from the grant maker asking if that relationship had actually continued, and it had. And then they were offering additional money if we'd expand it to other schools in the state where we're interested, and we said we were. So sometimes thinking up front about sustainability and actually carrying it out might actually build a longer-term working relationship with some grant makers. The type of grant can make a difference as you move forward. One-time grants, if it's just to do a photo collection, and the photo collection is done, easy. You just wait till you have another collection you want to process and digitize, and you go out for another grant. That's easy. Demonstration grants are interesting because grant makers are often interested in new and innovative things. So let's say you want to demonstrate that you can actually put up movie, video, and audio on your website and make it searchable and accessible to your researchers and viewers and patrons. Well, that demonstration grant might be the seeds for a longer-term grant to put up major collections once you prove you can do something technically. So demonstration grants have an interesting way of moving forward if you're successful. One of the tougher ones are program startup grants, where everyone wants to pay to start up a program, but grant makers typically don't want to pay to maintain staff and overhead over the long term. But we'll talk about some ideas where even with program startup grants, you can find different ways to make it innovative and interesting to future grant makers. Okay, I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on this slide, and it kind of goes from doing things that are more, are simpler to more difficult. I think it was in the second webinar, Mike Como talked a lot about partnering and collaborating up front when you put the grant application together. And if you're interested in knowing more about that, you might want to go back and view that webinar, which is on the CoSA webinar website. And I know Sarah's going to be talking more about this, so I'm not going to say a lot more about this item. However, you can identify grant makers to move forward, and so you do need to think about the money sometimes. It's not just about alternatives to money. And other grant makers, if you're looking for a new partner, you might look for one that has other funding sources. In the past, we've partnered with libraries and higher education because they often have access to funders and grant makers that we don't. So you can still think about the money, but being creative and moving forward, you can think of a lot of different things you could do, but still there's money involved. The next one is interesting, charging a fee for a service. We have a very large collection of WPA photos. Every house during the Great Depression was photographed in the city of Seattle. And we have never gotten a grant to process and digitize the entire collection. It's one of our more popular collections. So finally, we charged $10 to get a photo of your house. And that fee actually generated enough revenue that we can continue to make progress on processing the entire collection. So even though the fee is not a big and a lot of money all at once, it's still giving us a sustained approach to move forward to get the entire collection eventually digitized and online, and people can get the picture of their house for free. So fee for service can work in the right circumstances. It worked very well for us on this program. Every time the Seattle Times advertises you can get a picture of your house, we literally get thousands of requests for house photos. So this is one of those things where you normally wouldn't think of charging a fee at most archives or libraries. It did work for us in this case. Don't forget volunteers and interns and those work-study students. We had a 3-term governor who was also a U.S. Senator, and he donated 40 of his scrapbooks that covered his entire career in public service. We also received a very generous gift to digitize those scrapbooks and put it online. It was not enough to do the job. It barely covered the cost of the imaging, much less applying the metadata that is needed to be able to search them online. So what we've done is we've actually hired 3 grad students from Eastern Washington University in the Public History program, which has an emphasis on archiving, and they went to work this week and will be working all summer indexing those scrapbooks, so all 40 of them will be up and online and searchable by Thanksgiving. But the gift, while it was very generous, it was not generous enough to get all 40 scrapbooks done, so we improvised. And the nice part about the work-study partnership, the university picks up part of the expense and we pick up part of the expense. So it was a way of stretching out some dollars to get the job done that the original gift didn't fully fund. You don't think very much, if you don't already have a gift program going or an annual campaign, consider it. We actually went and changed our statutes about a decade ago to make it very clear that the archives could receive cash gifts. We also had our Attorney General set up a 501c3 so that those gifts would be tax deductible. And it's quite surprising, but every once in a while we checked our gift account and we've had balances of $10,000 to $15,000. Well, those dollars come in very handy when the grant doesn't get the job done or the grant winds down. And a major gift program, we don't have a development officer, so this is something we work on in our spare time, and it's often a researcher or a donor or something that is interested in the archives and asks how they can make a difference. So we do have a gift program. We do have a 501c3 organization with an independent board, and we do get gifts. So if you do not have a gift program going, think about it, because they do work. And we're not an active program where we have somebody asking for money all the time, but we still get those gifts. A compelling case statement for our budget increase. That's not very easy these days. There's not many of us that go in for budget increases and actually get them. First of all, you have to have your own agency be willing to advance it and then have the governor propose it and the legislature actually adopt it. But we were successful this year. We used to have a local government grant program up to 2008 where we actually made grants to local governments to improve their records management. And when the 2008 recession hit, the money for that program dried up. So we thought about how do we get the legislature interested again in funding that program. And what we did is we made the linkage. We've had quite a number of local governments paying out huge judgments for public disclosure requests that weren't done properly, so they're paying out $500,000, $800,000 in penalties and legal fees to requesters for public disclosure requests. So we went back and said if we can actually have local governments improve their records management, we might be able to reduce the risk of those huge judgments and those huge fines. And we were shocked, but the legislature agreed, and they gave us $1.5 million now for the next 3 years each year. So we'll be spending $1.5 million on grants for local governments for the next 3 years. It's a pilot, and they're asking us to measure the results and come back. And if it has an impact, they said they would continue the funding. But usually you don't even think of asking for budget requests these days. And we were very leery about whether this would even get the first base, but the governor actually signed it. It actually happened. And we have a legislative session right now that has a budget crisis, and the regular operating budget has not passed, but our bill providing the funding for this grant program did pass. So we were shocked and amazed, but my advice is if you don't ask, you don't receive. Now the last one here on this slide looks like the toughest. Just absorb the activities you are doing with your grant into your organization with existing resources. But let's think about that for a second. Let's say you did have a large digitization project. Well, your staff are trained. You now have the hardware, software, and other equipment you needed for the grant. You can now just maybe think about stretching it out, throttle back the amount of work you're going to do, and maybe you can do it with fewer people or serve fewer people, or maybe you can split the work with your partnering institution. But there are ways to get there. We're probably going to spend the next 5 or 10 years on our WPA house photograph collection, but it will be done. And the key is thinking creatively about how to get from here to there without just giving up or waiting for more money. So it's not always easy, but I think it is possible. And almost everything that I covered here today, we have done at one time or another. We don't do all these things all the time, but we've had grants when they ran out that we had no choice but to do this or that. So it's a list to think of as you're going through the alternatives other than just saying we have to quit. So with that, I will close, and Sarah, I know, will be adding, expanding to this.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I have the bouncing ball, so it's my turn. Okay. Welcome from the Old North State. Again, my name is Sarah Koonts, and I'm the State Archivist from North Carolina. And I will say a disclaimer before I get started here. I am very enamored by our digital collection, so if the subject interests me, then it shows up in all of my presentations. And currently we are knee-deep in World War I centennial celebration, so I've picked some of my favorite posters as our theme here. But really what I'm going to focus on, picking up from where Steve left off, is about maintaining momentum, particularly around the personnel end and the relationship end in maintaining that momentum once a grant has finished up, and also planning for it before the grant finishes up. So my focus here is sustainability, particularly with the human resources. And I'm going to mainly be drawing today from our experiences with grants that involve cooperative projects or shared collaborative things that are created during a grant. So let's get started. In maintaining momentum, particularly with those cooperative grants, you're often going to find that along the way for the grant activities, you've developed partnerships, joint activities, committees, things like that. And I think those are some of the most energizing and important things that, if possible, should be sustained and given attention after a grant wraps up, because often they can yield great results for your programmatic efforts along the way, and they go a long way towards sustaining the good work that was started in a grant. So I recommend that part of that sustainability plan that you developed, that Steve had referenced as well, should involve the human resources and the people and the offices that are involved and developed and nurtured during a grant. So it's not always just about the money, it's about the people too, because sometimes momentum fails when we don't account for the human resources involved along the way. So what's our situation here when we're looking at maintaining momentum? First thing I like to do is look around at a grant and find out who the champions are, particularly in these collaborative efforts. Is it a particular office that championed your work? Is it a particular person that was an advocate for you? Find out what they can do to continue that work. Are they able to maintain participation in a joint activity or effort? If not, are they even allowed to just continue to advocate for the efforts that were started under a grant? So that's, I think, part of your sustainability plan is identifying who can continue to be your ally after the grant has wrapped up if you want to continue these activities. And then another equally important piece to this is you're reviewing those partnerships. How can you remain connected to the grant activities? And if you're finding ways, then you need to put time and effort and attention into remaining involved in those types of steering committees or advocacy groups or joint committees that are started by a grant. So one example from North Carolina would be that we had an NDIP grant from the Library of Congress many years ago to look at the preservation of geospatial records, GIS records. And a lot of that was done in North Carolina via a subcommittee of our Geographic Information Coordinating Council, which is a statewide body. Members are appointed by the governor and the General Assembly to the body. But this work that was done, this great work for the grant, was done through a subcommittee. Well, we quickly realized as that grant was wrapping up that this overall committee, the whole steering committee, could be a great ally. So we stayed involved. We stayed in touch with those members. We came to meetings. We kept advocating for the small piece that the archives played in this giant picture of GIS governance in North Carolina. And we made it known to them that we wanted to remain involved. And within a short period of time, they created a seat on the committee for our department. So now we actually have a place at the table in every one of those steering committee meetings. And to that end, I always make a point to go. I never skip those meetings because I feel like it's important to keep reminding them that we are interested in GIS preservation and we are here to help. And so I think it's important to build that into your sustainability plan, that you make it a priority to work on those relationships and continue to provide care and feeding of them, especially with external stakeholders, even as a grant-funded activities wrap up. So on this slide, in maintaining momentum, I'm talking a little bit about planning for staff changes. Our state librarian, and the state library is a sister agency to ours within our department, has a coffee mug that I love. It says, be a conspicuous, or I'm a conspicuous collaborator. And I think that's really good advice. It sounds kind of funny, but it's good advice in thinking about maintaining momentum on a grant. Personnel changes. Administration changes. For all of us in state agencies, you might have an elected head to your office, or in our case where we report up through the governor's chain of command, you get a whole new administration, and you need to plan for that people may or may not be around. When North Carolina was involved in the IPER project from CoSA, the Intergovernmental Preparedness for Essential Records, we had a wonderful champion in the Emergency Management Agency, and then he left to go take a job with the Army Corps of Engineers. So I needed to plan and account for the fact that that one champion may not always be there. So that's a very important piece as well. So in doing that, I think it's about starting relationships with an office, not with a particular individual, just in case your individual champion leaves. And one of the things that I'm mindful of when I'm doing this kind of activity after a grant is keep up what I call your ask and your offer, particularly if it involves activities that were started under a grant. Can you do this for me, and here's what I can do for you? So we do a lot of that with the Geographic Information Coordinating Council. Yes, I'm happy to help you with this piece of the project if you can help me with this other one. So that maintains a connection with your groups that you started relationships with under a grant. And then I always enjoy what I call shameless promotion of what your joint efforts were started under a grant. And by that I mean take the time to tell other groups, other stakeholders, everyone around you about the great work that was started under the grant. Because again, you don't know when administration is going to change or personnel could possibly change. So every opportunity that you get, particularly as the grant is wrapping up, talk about the great work that is being done or has been done on a grant. So I'm doing this right now for an NHPRC grant that we have for email preservation. Every chance I'm in front of any state agency group, especially the CIOs, even if it's not the topic, I say, oh, let me tell you about the great work that we're doing with this grant on email preservation, so that they at least hear it and it sticks in their mind and they know that this is an effort that might be worth their attention and their participation in the future. So often grants will produce tools and other products that can be of value long after the funding is gone. In particular, in North Carolina, I think about the training that was developed under the IPER grant that CoSA had. We've had a series of grants through the NHPRC for our Traveling Archivist program. Those have created some very useful products and manuals and tools that we can continue to use long after a grant is over. The NDIP grant on geospatial efforts yielded a really strong records retention schedule for geospatial records that we have continued to use and adapt along the way. So you need to plan to sustain those tools. And I think also in the front end, before a grant is even wrapped up, you need to make that part of your sustainability plan to think about the audiences that are now and audience that could be coming for your tools. And that's an important piece that I would commend to you not to forget. And yet again, don't forget your shameless promotion of what's going on even before the grant ends. As I mentioned on the last slide, I'm very vocal to all state agency groups about the about our email preservation grant, and it's yielded some good sustainability plans even before, and we're only halfway through the grant. So I'm very they're very pleased, and I don't feel shy about talking about that because I think it, again, gives people a way to connect with you and find ways to make those tools that are being developed under the grant useful after direct funding is over. So again, before a grant ends, think about your audience that you have or your potential audience for these grant tools. What kind of demand are you willing to maintain? Are you simply looking to maintain the existing level of tool use, or is there the potential for you to find new audiences and increase demand for these tools? And that's something you need to think about and build into your sustainability plan. So, for example, I've mentioned a couple of times the email grant. One of the things that we're doing with some of the tools that are developed there is we're not really giving agencies an option to think about these tools as a one-time during the grant kind of activity. We're starting to bake them into how they deal with us so they can expect to continue to be using these well into the future. And then my shameless self-promotion of what we're doing has allowed our Department of Information Technology to kind of latch on to some of the structures and the framework that we're developing with that grant and see it in adaptable ways that they can use it with other areas that they work with us. So there might be other governance pieces that they can take the tools being used and adapt it in the email grant and apply them in other spaces. So that's worked out pretty well. And one example of that is they're using some of our governance structure for email to think about how they could apply it to shared drives across agencies. And they like that we've come up with something that not only works for the short term, but also might work in other uses as well. So again, you have to be out in front of your stakeholders talking about what you're developing, what you have developed, and so remind them that there may be other uses out there. So not all grants can remain at the same level of activity forever. Funding might be very critical to maintaining the same level of activity. So what you need to do is expect to adapt those activities over time. You need to be flexible in your sustainability plan to make sure that you maintain at least some momentum in a grant if you hope to continue the work post-funding. So again, one of the things that I find important with the shameless self-promotion is you need to do it to your own agency and your own staff. Our staff may move to another department, they might move out of state, they might retire. So we get new staff in all the time. If they don't know what went on in this grant, how are they going to know what good work needs to be continued? So you also need to be making sure that even internal to your own agency, you're reminding everyone of the great work that was done under a grant and what you're going to continue and how you're going to sustain it, because that is an important piece as well. So part of maintaining momentum and being adaptable with how you're going to maintain a grant is to expect to cross-train staff on grant activities. Like I said, staff leave all the time and new ones start, so you need more than one person to be aware of how to continue grant-initiated activities. You also need to try to keep up some regular momentum even if your budget might be under stress. So an example from North Carolina would be a few years ago we started, as I mentioned, under NHPRC funding, a traveling archivist program. And one of the things that we've done with that program and with successive grants is we've tried to build in some flexibility with it so that we can continue to sustain it within our own budget. So no, my division budget might not have the ability to do as many trips as were done under initial grant funding, but I try every year to at least have one competitive round of traveling archivist visits, just so that that program is maintained at a basic level of at least annually. There is publicity, there's competition for the visits, there's website activity, things like that. So even in lean years, we're making sure that that does not die on the vine and we have to kind of jumpstart it or recreate it from dead, that we can continue going with it. And then a few years ago, one of the things we did is we realized that we had sort of built our traveling archivist sustainability plan around retired state archivists? Well, there aren't that many of those around, and they do get older, and they do kind of, want to retire and not have to go traveling around the state. So we spent some time with our SHRAB board thinking about ways to sustain that was not tied to one individual person. And so our next grant was about training new people to be more regionally based and to volunteer for this program, and that's been very successful for us as well. So again, we can keep up the momentum and have a little bit of flexibility in keeping up that program. And the last piece of this is don't forget those outside partners or outside stakeholders, and Steve mentioned this as well. What can they financially contribute? Are they willing to think about, the second traveling archivist grant and how to make it even better? Are they willing to come to the table and say, oh, we need another grant on this subject, or let's seek some outside private funding? It doesn't hurt to maintain those lines of communication, even if it's just only about staff, but often you can move from staffing and cooperative efforts into the money piece, and how can we continue this to build on this great relationship? So I think those are all important aspects of maintaining momentum and all things that should be accounted for when you are thinking about a sustainability plan with your grants. So this, I'll end with this slide. This happens to be probably one of my favorite World War I images. It's from a gentleman's scrapbook. He took a lot of these great pictures, and he seemed to have a lot of girlfriends in many ports. And we particularly like this image because it's titled Some Party, and it's two guys kissing two girls. And it's kind of hard to tell from this small image, but the couple on the left, the sailor on the left, that is the owner of the scrapbook. And on the back of this little picture, there was this inscription, and if you can't read it, it says, everybody says we don't look experienced because you are looking at the camera, and that is from the lady that he is kissing. So I just wanted to end on that. With a little bit of effort, you can look very experienced in sustaining all the great work done by a grant, but it doesn't come without planning and thinking through and making plans to account for staffing changes and administration changes and budget crises, and that's all part of your sustainability planning. So with a little bit of effort, you can look like you really know what you're doing and make sure that you can keep your great activities started by a grant going well into the future. And that is what I had. Shelley, are you handling questions?
Yes, I think I am. So we're going to take the next couple of minutes to answer any questions or any comments. So if you have any, please go ahead and type those into the chat box or the Q&A, and we'll try to get those answered for you. I'm trying to think of anything, Steve and Sarah, and you guys just answered all of my questions, so I can't think of anything to even ask you guys. It was very good. It's very informative. I am noticing that, with grant applications, they do really ask for that sustainability piece and part in your grant applications. So when you guys are preparing, your most recent grant that you guys have done, when did when you were reading the grant application, when did you really start putting that together for your most recent grant? Either Steve or Sarah, did you put that together before you even kind of really got serious about applying for that grant? Or was it just kind of part of the whole, preparing the budget and all of that? Where did that preparing for that piece in your grant application, where did that come into play?
I'll take a crack at the question. We once did it the wrong way, where we didn't build in it was actually another NDIC grant. We had 11-state consortium, 10 states hosting their digital collections at our digital archives as a demonstration that they could digitize and ingest and make accessible. And when we put together that grant proposal, none of us thought about how to sustain it. And it wasn't actually in the grant application that we had with NDIP through Library of Congress. That was the day when Bill Lafergie was there. He's now retired. And unfortunately, when that grant program ended in 2011, a large number of the states went dark and weren't able to keep their digital collections up. So in that case, we utterly failed because it wasn't in the grant application. Since then, we've had grant applications where it's definitely there, and we definitely do think about it, and we definitely do outline. I don't think the grant makers are looking for an exhaustive plan, but a one-page bulleted outline of how you're going to sustain the activities. They're looking for clarity and conciseness, so definitely I think that's the time to plan ahead. And you also can put a shameless plug in there that maybe part of it will need future grant support, and plant the seeds maybe for some additional support along the way.
And I would add, we've done it in a couple of different places, and probably just like Steve, we've done it wrong sometimes or too late sometimes. For our SHRAB grants, that tends to be part of our strategic planning discussions. You know, what is it that we're doing? How are we building this? How can we make this sustainable? So I think our Traveling Archivist program has benefited from a couple of different serious rounds of strategic planning where we talk about the next steps. What do we have? And even in just the most recent grant that we created from SHRAB, we went back and reviewed all of the tools that were created with the TAP program, what's going to be useful for this one so that we can continue to use them and continue to evolve the program. We knew from the get-go we wanted to maintain it on my division budget, but we were looking for ways, particularly in the personnel end, to sustain it without being reliant on one individual. And I think with other grants, like our current email grant, just by its nature, we had it set up in the grant to be sustainable because it's going to be baked into our process and our procedures. But what we've tried to do as we've gone along in the grant is really spend some time on the personnel relationships, the interagency relationships, and making sure that, as I said, we're conspicuously promoting what's going on with that grant to actively find ways that we can broaden its reach and broaden its effectiveness. And I think that's not usually something in a sustainability plan you have to provide to a granting agency, but we're well aware that, you know, with state agency, interagency cooperation, you have to be prepared to think through when people are going to, you know, you get a whole new administration, we have a whole new CIO. So, you know, you have to spend time thinking about that you have to keep rerunning your publicity and to make sure that they're informed.
Thanks. Becky, have you seen any other questions come in?
I have not seen any questions.
No. Well, Sarah and Steve, can you think of anything else you want to add? Otherwise, I will pass it on to Ann to talk about upcoming events.
I'm good. I think if anyone has any questions, my email was on the slide deck. You can certainly feel free to contact me offline.
All right. Thank you.
And we will have a Learning Lab follow-up next Thursday at 3 o'clock Eastern Time, so feel free to join the call and we can discuss the subject matter further.
That sounds great. Thank you. I'm going to pass it off to Ann.
Thanks very much, Shelley, and thank you, Sarah and Steve. I've put up the slide about the Learning Lab for next Thursday, and I invite all of you to join us for this conference call event. It won't be a webinar, it's a conference call. And this is really meant to follow up. Steve Excell is going to be joining us and will be leading that, that discussion. But this is your opportunity really to come back and be with one of the webinar presenters to ask more questions, more in-depth questions, to bring specific questions also to the table that you might be grappling with your own grant programs. And it's just an opportunity. It's very informal. I think Steve is going to do a little setup for us at the very beginning, but then the bulk of the time is really your time to ask questions and to share with each other too. So I encourage you to come back again next Thursday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern to participate in our Learning Lab. It's my job to wrap up our webinar today by giving you some of our upcoming activities, our webinars and our events, and of course, right on the horizon, the near horizon, that is annual meeting, which will be held in Boise, Idaho this year. And, oh, I'm sorry, I'm thinking I'm on some other horizon. I should be looking at webinars. But dealing with the annual meeting, we have traditionally done a webinar after the annual meeting, a wrap-up and a recap of what was discussed at the annual meeting. This is a great time, if you're not able to go to the annual meeting, to plug in with us and attend that webinar, which is going to be on Thursday, July 27th. And just find out what went on out in Boise, ask questions, and kind of get a sense of what's going to be on the horizon for the remainder of the calendar year. We'll return to our grants planning and management theme in August with the next webinar in that series, and this is all about budgeting for grants. So I really hope that those of you who are struggling with budgeting tune in and learn more about that. As with all the webinars in the grants management series, there will be a learning lab following that August webinar, and that will be on August 31st. So another opportunity, again, very informal, just conference call in, and learn more about budgeting. I think that one's with Jim Corridon from Indiana, and maybe others. So stay tuned for that. And then we will be doing the second of our 2 SHRAB town halls on September 28th. Each year, CoSA's corporate partnerships provide critical funding support for many CoSA membership activities and events. And we're especially grateful to the 2017 corporate sponsors. They include Ancestry, Preservica, Family Search, Gaylord Archival, Apex Software, and our newest corporate sponsor, SpaceSaver. And of course, we couldn't be doing our educational programming without the generous support of our federal funders, the NHPRC, and the IMLS. Thank you to all of them. Now here we are on upcoming events, and of course, right around the corner practically is our annual meeting coming up in Boise, Idaho. That will be on July 12th, a Wednesday. And we hope that those of you who are planning to come have registered and you've gotten your hotel room. I understand just recently that hotel rooms now, the block has been sold out, and so people are registering in an overflow hotel. So that's great. Great news about that. Our annual meeting comes just the day before the Niagara annual meeting and conference opens on Thursday, July 13th, and will run through Saturday of that week. So I know that many of our members are planning to stay through to the entire Niagara conference. So it's shaping up, I think, to be a very good meeting, strong response in terms of registration, so that's really great news. And SAA is having its annual meeting a week later out in Portland, Oregon, and I know that some of our members are going to that as well. We hope you've got the National Digital Stewardship Alliance meeting on your calendars for October 23rd through 26th. That's going to be in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And the Best Practices Exchange is coming to Boston in November 6th through 8th. The notice just went out about the call for session papers and proposals, so we hope that a number of our CoSA members will be submitting proposals for sessions. Once this webinar concludes, you'll be automatically directed to our evaluation page, and we certainly hope that you'll just take a few minutes to fill out the evaluations very quick, but it really is helpful to our Education and Training Committee when it comes time to plan webinars for next year. So please take a moment to do that. And then finally, here are all the different ways you can stay connected with CoSA through our website, of course, the PERS portal, which is a wonderful resource on all things electronic and digital. we're on Twitter as well, and of course Facebook, which is very active. So I think that's our last slide. Yep, it is. Thank you one and all for joining us today. A special thanks to Sarah Koonts and Steve Excell for presenting today, to Shelley Thompson for being our moderator today, and to Becky Juleson for taking care of our IT all the way through. I hope that we see you next week and certainly next month. So take care, everybody, and thanks for coming.